Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial. I'm going to introduce AutoCAD, one of the best CAD software for creating two-dimensional drawings in architecture and construction. When we run AutoCAD for the very first time, we have to sign in with the email and password that we use to create our AutoCAD account. Go to Product, Open, turn off this page. OK. We can see the Start tab. If we have recent projects, they will be displayed here. Let's pay attention to the left side of the page. Autodesk Projects contains nothing now. Learning includes helpful tips and videos. If you are interested in them, you can watch them. We can either click the open arrow to run an existing project, or click the new arrow to start a blank project from the template. Let's use this one, AutoCAD DWT. Open. Close these things. The interface of the new project looks like this. At the top, we have the ribbon, which contains basic drawing tools, modifying tools, and other tools. We can click the tools to use them. We can use the Minimize to Panel button to change the ribbon size. We can switch between tabs, or add a new drawing file by clicking on the button here, or click this sandwich-like button, New Drawing. On the right, we have View Cube and Navigation bar. We can change the direction of the view. We can move the view. Right-click to exit the command. We can zoom in or zoom out. We can rotate the view. Click top to go back. The UCS, User Coordinate System, displays the horizontal and vertical directions of the view. The X represents the horizontal direction, while the Y represents the vertical direction. At the bottom, we have Layout tabs, Command Panel, and Status bar menus. Layout will be covered later. The command panel is the heart of AutoCAD. We can enter commands directly in the panel instead of clicking the tools in the ribbon. For example, tap L in the command panel. Enter will activate the line tool. The common features in status bar menu are polar tracking and object snap. Polar tracking guides cursor movement to specify angles. Object snap snaps the cursor to certain points. Delete this line and move the view a little bit this way. Now let's move on to the tools. First, we are going to talk about units. There are 3 ways to open the Drawing Units window. We can go to the Application menu, Drawing Utilities, Units. The window pops up. Or we can type UN in the command panel. UN represents unit. Enter. The units window pops up. Or we can type UN in anywhere on the canvas. UN. Enter. The same window pops up. Then we want to change the Links tab to Architectural and Precision to 0 foot 0 inch. Make sure the scale is inches. Okay. Next, we are going to talk about the basic drawing tools. The basic drawing tools include line, polyline, circle, arc, rectangle, ellipse, and hatch. Let's start with line. We can draw lines through the tool. Click here. Move the cursor this way. Give it a value. 1. Enter. Then move it down. 0.5. Enter. Then this way. 1. Enter. Now we don't want more lines, so press the Enter key to exit the command. We can see we have 3 separate lines, even though they look connected to each other. Press the ESC key to quick selecting. We can type L to activate the line command. Start here, this way. Give it a value, 1, enter. Then this way, 0.5, enter. Then this way, 1, enter. Press enter to exit the command. We got 3 more separate lines. Move the view up a little bit. Let's see the polyline. Start here. Move the cursor this way. 1, enter. Then move it down. 0.5, enter. Then this way. 1, enter. Press the Enter key to exit the command. We can type PL to activate the polyline command. Repeat the steps. Compare with using line. Using polyline can create a single object that consists of multiple lines. This is a single object. These are 3 lines. Circle. There are several options under the circle. Select Center Radius. Click here. This will be the center of the circle. Then type a value for the radius. 0.5. Enter. Then select Center Diameter. Click here at the center of the circle. Type a value for the diameter. Then select 2 points. We can use start point of the line at the first point of the circle. Then click the end point of the line at the second point of the circle. We can see we draw a circle between the 2 lines. Then select 3 points. Let's use this point as the first point of the circle. The second point is this one. The third point is the center of this circle. Select this 10 10 radius. Click this line. Then click this line. Then type a value for the radius, 0.5, enter. We get a circle that's tangent with these two lines. Then select 10, 10, 10. Click this line, and this line. We can see we get a circle that's tangent with these three lines. Arc. There are also several options under the arc. I'm going to talk about two of them this time. Select 3 point. We can use the start point of this point line as the first point of the arc. Then click the end point as second point. Then click here as the third point. Select Start, Center, Links. Start at this point. Then click this point at center of the arc. Then type a value, 1, enter. The rest will be covered later. Rectangle. The button contains rectangle and polygon. We will discuss rectangle this time. By simply clicking two diagonal points, we can create a rectangular polyline. If we don't like to click the command at the top, we can type REC, enter. Click here. We can input dimensions to create a rectangle. Type 1, comma. This value sets up the horizontal dimension. Now we can only work on the vertical dimension. We should use a negative value here. Negative 0.5, enter. Let's draw one more rectangle. 1, comma, 0.5. See, the rectangle goes up because we use a positive value on the vertical dimension. Ellipse. Start here at the center. Then click this point. And then click this point. We can type EL to activate this command. Start here. Set the horizontal value, 1, enter. Then set the vertical value, enter. Hatch works on filling an enclosed area. There are many options, and we will get more options from the drop-down menu. Select this one, then click here. Enter. We fill the room with this pattern. Select the pattern. We are able to open the hatch editor to edit it. A fast way to open the hatch creation is to tap H, enter. Let's use the same pattern, but modify it. Angle, 45. Scale, 2. Enter. Click here. Enter. We get this in this room. We can also modify the pattern through the hatch editor. Select it. Angle. Scale. Now the rooms have the same one. Let's talk about selection. AutoCAD gives us two ways to select objects. Click an empty place and move the cursor from left to right. We can make a window selection. Only the objects completely contained within the blue box are selected. The objects that are not fully covered by the blue box are not selected. Press the ESC key to quit selecting. Let's do it again. Then move the cursor from right to left. We can make a crossing selection. Any objects touching the green box are selected. The objects that are not touched by the green box are not selected. If we click and hold when we move the cursor, we can make irregular selections. This works, but not recommended. Next, we are going to discuss the basic modifying tools. Move. This command moves objects from one place to the other. Select this circle. Enter. Click here. Then click here. The circle is moved. The hotkey of movement is M. Enter. Copy. This command helps us to copy objects. Select this circle. Enter. Click here. Then click here. We can create multiple copies. Press the Enter key to exit the command. The hotkey of copy is CO. Enter. Move the canvas. Rotate. This command rotates objects around this point. Select this one. Enter. Click here. Move the cursor to a place. Click. The hotkey is RO. Enter. Mirror helps us to create a mirrored copy of selected objects. Select this. Enter. Click here. Move the cursor to here. Click. AutoCAD gives us an option of whether we want to erase the source or not. Select Yes to remove the source. Select No to keep it. The hotkey is MI. Enter. Select No, we will have a mirrored copy of the ellipse. Trim helps us to crop the objects that meet the edges of other objects. If the cursor touches an object, a tiny red X shows up. Click. The object is cropped. Trim this one. Enter. The hotkey is TR. Enter. Trim these ones. Enter. Trim is utilized for removing extra lines or extra parts of an object. There is another command under the Trim button. Extend. This command helps us to extend objects to the edges of other objects. Simply click on the line we want to extend. It will be extended to this circle. Click this circle. It will be extended to the edge of this circle. Enter. The hotkey is EX. Enter. Fillet runs edges of objects. Choose radius in the command panel. Type a value. Enter. Select this line, then select this line. Press the Enter key to repeat the fillet command. Select this line, then select this one. If we don't change the value of the radius, the fillet will be the same. The hotkey is F. We can't fillet this two because this line is shorter than the fillet radius. Erase command is used to remove objects. Select this circle. Enter. The hotkey is E. Enter. Explode breaks a compound object into pieces. For example, this rectangle is a single object, but consists of 4 edges. If I click Explode, it's broken into 4 lines. The hotkey is X. Enter. Now this rectangle becomes 4 lines. Offset is used to create concentric circles and parallel lines and curves. We can offset any object through a point or at a specified distance. Type a value first. Enter. Select this line. Click here to confirm the direction of the offset. We can continue to offset objects until we get everything. Then press the Enter key to exit the command. The hotkey is O. Enter. Scale can be used to enlarge or reduce selected objects. Select this line, enter. Click this point. Then click this point. The line is enlarged. Repeat the command. Select this line. Enter. Click this point. Then click this point. The hotkey is SC. Enter. We can also enlarge a circle. Select it. Enter. Click here. Then click here. Array allows us to make multiple copies of an object in a pattern and along a path. Select this circle. Enter. AutoCAD gives us a pattern for the array. We can change the column. We can change the row. We can change the space between the objects. After we are done adjusting the array, press the Enter key. Now if we click one of them, we select the whole array. We can move them together. Zoom out a little bit. Next, let's talk about the status bar menu at the bottom. If we click this one, we can turn on or turn off the drawing grid. We can lock cursor movement to horizontal or vertical through the auto. Turn it on. When we draw a line, the direction only goes horizontal or vertical. The polar tracking gets cursor movement to specified angles. Draw another line. Start at this point. A green dashed line appears at 90 degrees. That's because the angle has been selected. Click the arrow here. We can see that 90 is checked. We can switch to 30, 60, 90. The tracking lines will appear when we reach 30 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees. The angles are preset and divided evenly into a 360-degree circle. The object snap allows us to snap an object on a specific location of another object. For example, if we want to draw a line to the end point of this line, we need to make sure the end point is checked from the Object Snap drop-down menu. See, the new line is snapped to the end point of this line. We can snap to the midpoint if we want. We can also snap to the perpendicular. Finally, we like to save the drawing. Click the Save As button. We can build a folder for a class assignment on the desktop. Give it a name. And Bake Tool. Give the file a new name. The File tab is OK. Save. Hopefully, this is helpful. Please contact me if you have any questions. See ya.